Stardust just posted a couple recent videos, his last two recent videos. And in these videos, he talks about two topics. One having to do with loyalty and how men bond with each other, and another briefly where he mentions the people that come up to people like myself, Stardust, other MGTOW, asking, well, what are your solutions? You don't have any solutions. This kind of cop-out deflectionary tactic, and I want to talk about that for a little bit. When people ask, well, what are your solutions? I want to ask them back, solutions to what? Exactly. Before we can ask for a solution, we have to be able to properly form a question. That's right, the question is what matters most if we want an accurate solution or an effective solution to a problem. Now, in talking about traditionalism, what people have to understand is that traditionalism didn't just spring up overnight. Nobody said, aha, eureka, I know what the solution is to this, hunter-gatherer, proto-agrarian gender reality that we live in. No, traditionalism had to be cultivated for centuries in order to develop a system where the forces of male sexuality and female sexuality could be harnessed in a way that boosted human productivity. Nobody said in one day, well, okay, men like to trade their ability for excess labor, their utility. They like to trade that for access to women's sexuality and reproductive ability. And neither will the answers to our problems currently come in some neat little prescription that's going to fix the problems we have with modern gender interaction. We have to go through a similar process of trial and error and experimentation to see what works in practice. And in order to do that, we have to ask what could work in theory and try it out, which is what we're doing now. This is what MGTOW is in the process of doing. Amongst other things. That's how it always is with these things. That's how it always will be. So with that said, for example, let's work on maybe getting male birth control out. And when that's out, let's examine all of the ramifications of this. Not just the obvious ones, but the unseen ones. And after that, we go from there. And the whole time, while we're reaching that point, we use MGTOW to get men to reject traditionalism, to reject gynocentrism, because in doing so, we are effectively priming them for these technological advances. So when they do arrive, men actually know what to do with them. They know how to use them to their advantage. That's how we move forward as men and as MGTOW. It's a crazy suggestion, isn't it? Invest in men while helping them to break free of the mental and biological chains that shackle them. But we can't do that so long as we have people diluting the path to the solution by confusing the question. These people, they want men to stick to their failed traditionalism, the same traditionalism that feminism spawned from, and they say, well, you don't have a solution and traditionalism is the only thing that works, etc. Except that traditionalism doesn't work any longer. It hasn't worked for a long time. And maybe we don't have a solution just yet, but people like you neglect to mention that the first steps toward finding solutions involve identifying the problems. And the problems with traditionalists is that they've identified the wrong problem and they've answered it with this it's all just feminism religion. Now, these people like to argue that if we just fixed marriage or made marriage more equitable, and if men just learn to recognize the traits of a female sociopath and screen out bad women, then maybe we can save marriage. But you'll never hear these people say that if marriage is causing so much damage, at least marriage in its modern incarnation, and we all know it's not going to go back to anything else for a very long time. So if marriage is causing so much damage to the nuclear family or whatever, then why do women keep getting to ask for it and even demand it with impunity? Because after all, whenever this supposed bedrock of civilization, this institution of marriage became commonplace, there were no city halls, there were no divorce courts, there were no divorce lawyers. Why aren't trad cons telling these women to be happy with unofficial marriages? Why don't trad cons tell women that it's disrespectful and it's insulting and even dangerous to ask a man to marry a woman? Who do these women think they are that they should feel entitled to marriage when the stakes are so high for men? If family is so important to the continuity of civilization, surely people will continue doing whatever it is married folks do without this contract, correct? The reason that marriage is allowed to persist in these traditionalist circles is because traditionalism is gynocentric and is concerned first and foremost with the welfare of women. And all you need to do to be able to determine this is to look at their rituals and their language, right? Look at the proposal of marriage. The man bends on one knee, presenting a burnt offering of gold and carbon, a tribute to his goddess. And he asks if she will accept him for marriage. If she will accept him, not for patrimony, but for matrimony. And this is followed by a lifetime of servitude. He must tithe with goods and resources, and he must be ready to die, if need be, for his goddess. And if he's good enough, if his worship is sufficient, for she is a jealous goddess, she just might bless him with the perpetuation of his genetics. Life everlasting for his identity until his male offspring repeat the process all over again. And then the cycle continues itself. And in this cycle, millions upon millions of men are destroyed, sometimes in literal sense. I mean, they're actually destroyed. And sometimes it could be something as innocuous as a highly intelligent, creative man limiting his potential, relinquishing his dreams for the default regularity of the protector-provider role. Now, we've talked about this before, but I want to mention it again. How many of these husbands do you see tinkering around in their garages for the few weekend moments they get away from their wife and kids? What do we call those places again? Yes, the man cave, right? A man cave. What a disgusting insult to the male creative spirit, that while the missus gets to adorn her walls with stupid decorations and trinkets and useless crap, the man of the house is relegated to some garage or some basement where he's actually creating something, making something. What if these men were encouraged by our society to do nothing but create? Maybe we should get women and make them do the back-breaking menial jobs and let men tax the daylights out of them, right? At least something useful and productive would come out of giving them large blocks of free time, funded by taxpayer dollars. Now, of course, I'm being sarcastic. This is something that would never happen, but I'm just trying to show you the massive expenditure of effort and male labor that is put into giving women leisure time, making them a leisure class, and we don't even get anything in return for it. I've said it before, that the peoples of the future that truly understand gender dynamics and how men operate specifically will be the next rulers of the world. And so this, gentleman, is what the main focus of this channel is, to further the understanding of the human male. So with all that said, let's do some understanding. I want to introduce to you the channel of a YouTuber by the name of Straight Shooter. And Straight Shooter happens to be a married man who's been very supportive of MGTOW and makes several videos talking about the topic. And I want to respond to a specific video of his, but I also want to make the point before I go on, because it is slightly relevant here, I guess, that MGTOW, or at least the MGTOW I know, we don't have any beef with married men, right? We see marriage and MGTOW as incompatible, but there are many men that are married that are supportive of MGTOW, who, although they may not be MGTOW, are very pro-male, and I think Straight Shooter is one of these people. Now, he made a video talking about War Machine. And for those of you who don't know, War Machine was a mixed martial arts fighter who was dating a porno star by the name of Christy Mack. They announced their relationship publicly, I believe, in 2013 and just recently broke up in 2014. And long story short, War Machine tries to reconcile their relationship after they had broken up and finds her with, surprise, another man. He then proceeds to beat the shit out of them both, and he puts Christy Mack in the hospital with a broken nose, a ruptured liver, amongst other injuries. I believe she's missing teeth now. I mean, he really fucked her up. And of course, this was a savage attack that nobody deserves, even if they're cheating. But needless to say, War Machine is now in jail, in prison, right? And his career is ruined, probably for life. So it turns out that he attempted suicide recently by trying to hang himself and was only unsuccessful in doing so because a prison guard stopped him. So needless to say, the guy is fucked, any way you slice it. And so Straight Shooter made a video discussing this, in which he titled it, I think rather appropriately, MGTOW Can Save Lives. And he talks about, how things could have gone for somebody like War Machine had he known about MGTOW. But he also expressed disbelief that a man of his status and wealth would even bother to deal with a woman like Christy Mack, who is, attractive, but is also a porno star, right? And that's what I want to talk about today. I think that perhaps people like War Machine, these men, they look for women like her, like Christy Mack, because of the sneaking suspicion that any girl he meets as a successful, high-status, mixed martial artist athlete is only going to be into him for the status and protection and money he offers. And again, this terrifies men on a primal level, right? This terrifies us that women don't love us for who we are. So my theory is that some of these guys, like War Machine, go for the fallen Madonna. the woman that's used up, because deep down they know that this mythical Nawal that loves them for them and their humanity, she doesn't exist. So he seeks to guard himself against letting himself fall into that fantasy by choosing a woman that's already indisputably corrupted. You see, for men like War Machine, who can have plenty of attractive women and has the money and status to sleep with, if he wanted to, a different woman every night, and I think it's safe to speculate that he's bedded probably hundreds of women, an interesting thing happens to the male psychology after they've had more than their fair share of women like War Machine has. When a man has sexual access to a lot of women, the novelty and the variety at first is enjoyable, right? You're going through multiple periods of brief courtship followed by sexual access, and when that particular girl gets boring, you have something new lined up ready to go, and it's great for a while. But what happens is that the old axiom, the best pussy is new pussy, slowly morphs into, at that level of sexual access, to a once you've had one pussy, you've had them all belief, right? Pussy, believe it or not, once you've had enough sexual experience, begins to lose its luster, right? We can see this with the phenomenon of internet porn, where men that could look at a Victoria's Secret catalog pre-internet porn access, they could look at that and become aroused. They can't do that anymore. They can't get aroused anymore without viewing hardcore porn. And the same dynamic exists in terms of women in your life. If you make access to women ubiquitous on both the reality-based or virtual scale, your attraction diminishes and you now need more stimulus to achieve the same level of sexual interest. And that's because, well, pussy is a drug, right? It's just like an addiction process. So on the level of someone like War Machine, right, a successful mixed martial arts fighter with money and status, what I suspect happens is that another version of the Nawalt fantasy manifests itself in men like this. This War Machine character, he was once just an average guy with no money and no fame and the status that comes along with that. And he remembers vividly, I'm sure, what his prospects in terms of sexual access to women were like back then. And now that he's famous and he has wealth and status, well, of course, he's had his fair share of women. And the cruel and ironic joke that nature plays on men is that only after you become sexually experienced with women, only after that is when you can see how much the actual value of female sexuality really is worth. It's a red pill in and of itself to be found in the mere act of sleeping around with a good amount of women. It teaches you a lot, gentlemen. When you've never had sex or when you've had very little, men will do almost anything to get it. And when you've had more than enough to satiate you, you can look at it for what it is and determine that sex really isn't all it's cracked up to be. As a matter of fact, the sex was only so good because you attached your blue pill emotion and male Nawalt fantasy onto the sex. A lot of men looking back on divorce trying to figure out what went wrong and what the hell happened and how easily they allowed themselves to be taken to the cleaners will say to themselves that back then when things were good, right, when I was in love with this woman and when she was in love with me, the best feeling in the world was when it would dawn on me that this is my girl and she liked me. I couldn't believe that this girl liked me. Right? And a lot of times this woman isn't some incredibly attractive specimen, but just average. But such is the deification that goes on in the blue pill mind. And that deification is what I want to focus in on here. The deification occurs because of male mother need. Stardust and I have talked about this at length. If you don't know what that is, check my previous videos, and I'm sure you'll find some videos talking about it in detail. But basically it boils down to this almost instinctual knowledge that men have of themselves that we know we're alone, right? That we're born and we're tossed into life and we live and we die, right? And I don't blame men for wanting to escape that reality. That's a harsh reality to swallow. But the problem is, gentlemen, that on the podium of that reality, on that island of reality, we're surrounded on every side by tar and by quicksand and by infinity. And you can run from this reality, but you'll only ever get so far. And every time you turn back, it's going to be right there in the distance for you to see, to remind you of your aloneness. And so we run away, right? And we bury our fears in some woman. And we worship her because for a time, she makes these men feel a little less alone. Now, the difference between your average blue pillar and men like War Machine is in where they run to, where they hide their fear of the great loneliness men are aware of. For the average blue pillar, it's in fantasies of love and monogamy. He wants to be able to have a woman all to himself. He wants fidelity because it scares him to ever think that she just may want another man other than him. That thought threatens to bring that aloneness back out of his subconscious And again, he'll be keenly aware of it, right? And that's terrifying to him. And it's even more terrifying to him, arguably, to have that aloneness drudged up again after he buried it deep down in his subconscious. It's even more terrifying to have that forced back up to the surface after he thought he'd gotten rid of it. In fact, this realization, I suspect, is what leads so many men to suicide after divorce. I don't even think it's the woman that makes them eventually kill themselves. Most of these men, deep down, if they're being honest with themselves, they regard their women as childlike, as feeble. Because most women, especially of the traditionalist variant, are childlike and feeble, right? Men can never respect such a creature. So it's not the loss of her that mortally wounds him. It's the loss of her promise of goddess rapture, right? The loss of the goddess who gave him humanity, the deity who made his podium feel crowded instead of isolated. So he fears that aloneness returning in the form of his deity, right? His angelic siren leaving him. A man like War Machine, though, understands that blue pill relationship monogamy, that's a myth. He's been on the beneficial end of female hypergamy too much to subscribe to the loneliness lessening strategies of his average Joe blue pill counterpart. He's seen women cheat on their significant others, for him, too many times. So he has no need for monogamy since he could replace women easily and is never lacking sexual access to a great many women. So he goes the opposite way, right? He seeks his goddess amongst the fallen. He doesn't seek an angel. He seeks a demon. He knows that the average Joe's blue pill goddess is a fraud and a lie, so he finds some damaged woman to deify. He doesn't worship the female ability to disperse sex. His wealth and status allow him control over that force, so he believes himself above the petty jealousies of the blue pill average Joe type, and he also knows that his wealth and status make it so that he can never know if a woman is with him only for his money, or if she has sex with him only for his status. So he seeks out a woman like Christy Mack, who, being a famous porn star, will never need his money, and having had taken hundreds of dicks as a profession, certainly isn't going to have sex with him off the job if she doesn't genuinely enjoy it. So he pursues that type of relationship, and he keeps it that way for a while, and it works for a while. But eventually, her being damaged goods like this, and the belief that he clings to, that her being damaged goods shields him from betrayal, eventually causes him to catch those same feelings his blue pill counterparts do. Eventually, he falls in love and figures out the hard way that a hoe will never be a housewife. And that's when these things happen. It's a bit of an emotional powder keg, and it landed a young, promising athlete in jail for a very long time. So it's important, I think, to start analyzing why men react this way, why we get jealous, why we're constantly beating each other down for the affections of women. Keep in mind that War Machine didn't just viciously assault his girlfriend, Christy Mack, but the guy she was sleeping with. What did he do? Well, we'll talk about that more in the future, gentlemen. But for now, I'm just going to bring up two articles that I thought were interesting. One of which was an article that's going to be in the description box. And I'm bringing up these articles because I believe they shed light on what I've just described to you. But there was one article that measured the genuine happiness and the emotional contagion involved in different groups, different gendered groups, consuming alcohol. Right? And it turns out that men shared more genuine emotion and more genuine smiles with each other when drinking. And I think this has something to do with the fact that men are conditioned to be stoic, to be emotionless, to always be in control. And I think that when we drink, the lessening of inhibition lets that's always just under the surface kind of peel away, like the layers of an onion. And I think it's interesting, right, that the more men drink, the more likely they are to display body language that's indicative of unabashed, genuine happiness. And again, the article is right there if you want to read it yourself. Right? The more they drink, the more they're able to express themselves specifically around other men. Right? That's interesting, that the change only occurred around other men. So I think this is something that's important. I think we should analyze this in our quest to understand what male brotherhood is all about. And it's also interesting that they revert back to their stoic, unemotional state when women are around. But when it's all male groups, they show more genuine emotion the more alcohol they consume. Now, of course, one can surely say that alcohol lowers inhibitions in a social setting for both genders, and in my opinion, they'd be correct. But again, I'm quite interested in the unique way men tend to interact with each other. Is it possible that when we get a few drinks in us, we're more likely not to see each other as rivals to be attacked, but as brothers to be embraced. Remember, I mentioned in one of my previous videos about how men develop body language, these passive-aggressive gestures, right? A brief locking of the eyes and a head nod to signal to each other that they aren't a threat. We need to start exploring this. We need to start exploring these things and decipher exactly the machinations that drive this process. And another interesting study that I want you guys to look at, and this is, of course, going to be in the description box as well, comes from UCLA by David Fessler, where he conducts experiments on how men size each other up. And the interesting part is that it turns out that men tend to minimize a male adversary's size when walking with other male friends, while men standing, for example, on a balance board or tied to a chair tended to maximize a male adversary's size. And even more interesting is that women, at their most fertile parts of their menstrual cycles, vastly overestimated the sizes of male adversaries, right? And this could provide us perhaps some insight into women's obsession with rape and, feminist obsessions with rape culture. You see, gentlemen, these are the things that we need to be exploring. We need to stop running in circles with feminists, arguing with them till the end of the world, and we need to start asking ourselves whether or not building male communities will help mitigate our tendencies to view each other as adversaries. We need to start asking ourselves, because it's against our very natures to do this, what is more likely to foster brotherhood amongst men? And is there some type of as of yet unexplored tendency for women to perceive men as a threat that has its basis in biology? That, gentlemen, is what we're going to be exploring going forward. Thanks for listening.